You're listening to Inside Eyes, and I'm your host, Laura Mae Northrup. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Laura Mae Northrup. We are on episode 8 of season 2. If you are starting this series for the first time, please note that the series is roughly designed to be listened to as a sequential series, as well as individual episodes. At times, there are topics covered in one episode and then expanded on in another. Essentially, a lot can be gathered by listening to the entire series in order. I encourage you to start with the first episode in this season, entitled Welcome Magic. And before I go on, I want to share that I wrote and published a book. My book is called Radical Healership: How to Build a Values-Driven Healing Practice in a Profit-Driven World. This is a book that tackles what it means to be a healing practitioner surviving within capitalism, running a thriving practice, and the complexities that come with that. It has a lot of practical information about how to run your practice, but what sets it apart from similarly oriented books is the politicized frame and the encouragement to think very deeply about what it is that you're actually doing with your life in the context of our times. You can find it anywhere books are sold, including ordering through an independent bookseller. It is part memoir and part politicized self-help, and if you get the audiobook, it's read by yours truly. I'm so delighted to be able to offer this piece of writing to you all. This is what I spent the lockdown portion of the COVID-19 pandemic doing, and seriously, I poured my heart, soul, and tears into this book. It has already sold out of its first printing, and people seem to find it super helpful. So, if you like what you hear on my show, the same level of heart and intention is waiting for you in that book. If you are considering becoming a healing practitioner, or you already are one, but you want to rethink how you walk your path, check it out. Again, it's called Radical Healership: How to Build a Values-Driven Healing Practice in a Profit-Driven World. And please note, although at the time of this recording, I am a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California, in the United States, this podcast is not therapy. It's not a substitute for therapy, and it's not advice attuned to your specific needs. So please seek out advice from a trained, competent practitioner about your specific situation to keep you as safe as possible before embarking on any healing with psychedelics or entheogens. I offer these insights in the spirit of harm reduction and education. And remember that there is sensitive content in these episodes that is not suitable for children. Okay, today I'm going to talk about isolation, loneliness, lack of connection, and all the myriad of ways that as humans, we can end up needing contact and not having it. Survivors can suffer immensely from isolation and loneliness. There are several reasons for this. One of those reasons is simply an experience that survivors have alongside non-survivors. We live in a global political and economic system that isolates us. Racial capitalism and its cohort of accomplices, white supremacy, and colonialism. Despite being instantly connected 24/7 with technology, we are often quite separate. We live in a time where, unlike the bulk of our ancestors, we move frequently for jobs, for education, due to cost of living, to escape war and other unsafe living conditions, as well as many other catalysts. Now, and in recent history, many people have been forced to relocate as a function of enslavement or ethnic cleansing. We move across states, across countries, and across continents. We are no longer simply humans working for subsistence in long-standing communities or tribes, but rather workers efforting at mass wealth accumulation for capitalist elites. And before critiquing this perspective with the reply that there have always been migrating populations and issues of wealth and privilege disparity, please understand that I am not idealizing the past, but rather pointing to an astronomical increase in wealth disparity that has contributed to substantially less long-standing relationships to place, land, and community. Contrary to how humans evolved, we now enter and exit communities frequently. We spend an excessive amount of time at work because so much of what we produce is extracted from the classes that produce it and hoarded by the wealthy. And this inordinate amount of time spent working robs us of time spent relating to loved ones, to ourselves, or to the earth. All of this changes how we connect to others. And for many of us, we do not have a consistent, lifelong sense of belonging to the same community. While that is not inherently a bad thing, it does mean that you could have been very close to a group of people, and many of them may have moved, or you may have moved. And there may be times in your life where you feel quite alone. And you might wonder when you will see those people again, or when you will feel close to a new group of people. And once that occurs, how long that group will sustain for. That is some of what we are swimming in as contemporary life in late-stage capitalism runs its course. Beyond the material limitations of capitalism, isolation is also fueled by extremely misguided values feeding the capitalist endeavor. In late-stage capitalism, we glorify loneliness. We measure success based on the size of house one can buy with the fewest number of people living there, the ability to live separate from family and be hyper-independent. Elite status isn't living in a home where each room is occupied by humans you love and relate to. It is owning a mansion along with summer homes, only used by so few people, massive amounts of space are empty at all times. Total land privatization has left us with little shared space in the world that can be entered freely or communally tended. In some places, it is illegal to loiter on a public street, and this limits authentic relationships with the people around us. Rather than resource sharing and cherishing the quality of our relationships, we tend toward resource hoarding at the expense of our relationships. The model of well-being in the US is based on owning everything and sharing nothing. We glorify the wealth to be waited on, to be served, to be spared observing poverty in public, to be not interdependent with others. We glorify somehow hacking the need to ask others for help and avoiding real intimacy with the people around us. We glorify being the best, which is actually quite lonely. We glorify being elite, being in a special group, being separate from the masses. Many of us do not achieve this and actually live in quite intimate quarters with others, maintaining interdependence and mutual aid out of necessity or preference. But it is still meaningful to note that this is some form of ideal by dominant US narratives. Without being consciously aware of it, we glorify isolation. While there are certainly communities that reject this thinking and, for example, value living communally or sharing in the ownership and stewardship of items and property, the dominant narratives of wellness do not center communal life at all. Ironically, all the wealth in the world cannot solve the dilemma of isolation because they are so intimately connected, and the former begets the latter. Wealthy people struggle to have authentic relationships with the people around them because many of the people surrounding them are service workers who are always in more need than them. And those who are not service workers are family, friends, and colleagues, in which the relationship is constantly impacted by a need to maintain proximity to the wealth, to be in good favor, to relate unauthentically. And those who are the wealthiest often do not receive important feedback about their behaviors, feedback that we all need in order to relate to others, which is a recipe for emotional immaturity and narcissism. And thus, the class chasm created by hoarding wealth damages the ability to make real connection. This is not a well life. This is, in fact, a disconnected life fueled by exploitation. Capitalism is bad for our relationships to literally every living thing in our lives. Sometimes I think about how, prior to industrialized life, it was said that passenger pigeons were so numerous the sky would darken for days during their migration. The last passenger pigeon died around the year 1900. Were the final pigeons lonely? Did they feel increasing fear for survival as their numbers dwindled and they no longer had the protection of a mass group? Or I wonder about what it was like to be the last caribou in the contiguous US, alone and without a herd. What is it like to be the two last northern white rhinos in existence? These animals are extinct or nearly extinct due to loss of habitat and hunting. Habitat destroyed for a profit. Hunting for a profit. Capitalism engenders isolation, even for the non-human beings on Earth. Survivors of sexual violence face a specific kind of isolation, which can in turn require great effort to create long-standing community, and it is meaningful to note that the political and economic system are working against that already challenging behavior. One way that survivors are specifically isolated is through the treatment they receive when they speak out about experiencing sexual violence. For many survivors, they are not believed by the people closest to them, or they are believed and then blamed by the people closest to them, or believed and then abandoned because facing sexual violence is so challenging even for bystanders. Not being believed and/or not experiencing solidarity creates isolation. And it supports a commonly held notion by survivors that other people are not safe or cannot be trusted. Additionally, research indicates that social rejection and physical pain are similar not only in that they are both distressing, but also in that they share a common representation in somatosensory brain systems as well. Experiencing profound rejection is quite literally painful. Survivors often feel so ashamed, humiliated, and stripped of dignity due to what they have endured that they do not share it with anyone. This is another type of isolation. Shame is a natural reaction to feeling powerless, and not sharing the experience could initially be a reaction to being made to feel powerless. However, I believe the intense long-term secrecy that many survivors enter into around the violence they have experienced is directly related to the ways society shames survivors, viewing them as damaged and responsible for the violence. Sexual violence is extremely impactful in a person's life. To hide that is an immense act of isolation. To be so deeply unknown by those around oneself, out of fear of rejection, projection, and other types of relational harm. Sexual violence is a form of trauma that always includes another person or people. To have one's humanity stripped away by another human being is incredibly isolating. It is as if this other person is saying, "You no longer belong with us, the humans. You are now an object, or less than a human." Some survivors report feeling like aliens or feel they are unworthy of belonging and connection because of the abuse or assault. This is, in part, a result of being so profoundly dehumanized. Many survivors have to do big, deep work to feel they deserve to be in the world with others. Or if they feel that some of the time, they have to do big, deep work to feel that they consistently deserve that. Survivors often find themselves in abusive friendships, abusive romantic relationships, and abusive work situations, in part because of the profound self-loathing that develops in relationship to feeling so dehumanized and undeserving of safe, loving community. Sexual violence in the form of incest destroys family relationships. It requires that members of the family either confront that someone in the family has caused unspeakable harm, that others in the family created the conditions for harm to happen or failed to provide protection, or that the family rejects the survivor as a liar. Either way, an inability to process the tragedy of incest often equates to a familial loss of connection for the survivor. We know that most sexual violence is perpetrated by people we know. It is catastrophically lonely to feel that someone you trusted has lost sight of your humanity to such a degree that they would commit a devastating and preventable act of violence against you. This feels like an important moment to remember that sexual violence is a tool to reinforce the existing power structures that I described earlier. As I talked about in season 1, it has been employed in war, chattel slavery, colonization, genocide, and the list goes on. It deeply traumatizes the victims and profoundly damages our communities. As humans, our liberation and the liberation of all life is intimately connected to healing and preventing sexual violence. Our liberation is dependent on our ability to be the opposite of isolated, but rather connected in healthy enough relationships with the people, plants, animals, and earth surrounding us. So as it stands, many people suffer from feeling they do not have enough meaningful, long-standing, mutually supportive, intimate relationships. And survivors face this in a unique way. Due to this level of abandonment by loved ones and society, survivors can often be triggered by being alone. It can feel profoundly rejecting and even induce depression or suicidal feelings at the experience of not having access to connection, or even worse, actually being rejected. In breakups or conflict with close loved ones, survivors sometimes report feeling like they are going to die due to the perception that they are being abandoned. I have heard this from many survivors over the years, and I think for some people, it feels extremely frightening to be alone because it can trigger the traumatic experience of isolation inherent in the original violence. Survivors can also feel unprotected if they are alone, perceiving that being alone means they are not safe from potential harm. Some survivors strive to live a life where they are seldom alone. This can cause an assortment of issues, but two that I want to highlight are the level of stress this puts on relationships and the lack of discernment inherent in choosing constant connection. First, the stress on relationships. Healthy relationships require that all parties feel allowed to be close and be separate. How close and separate is preferable varies on an individual basis. If one person in the relationship cannot handle the other being separate at all, This puts an immense strain on the relationship and can result in creating a parent-child dynamic, a savior-wounded victim dynamic, a perpetrator-victim dynamic, or simply lead to the relationship ending, thereby enacting the abandonment or disconnection that the survivor was trying to guard against. This can be extremely painful and send the survivor into a dangerously triggered state. With any of these dynamics, it is important to name that relational dynamics are just that, dynamics. I'm not saying that survivors on their own construct painful relationship dynamics. As a couples therapist, I am often repeating the adage, it takes two to tango, and it really does. Being in this kind of dynamic requires that the other person or persons have a psychology that interacts with the survivor in such a way to create a problematic connection. The second issue in avoiding being alone is about discernment. If you need people to be around you and available at all times, this often results in a lack of discernment, which can result in not protecting your emotional well-being by choosing to relate to people who are not a good fit for a myriad of reasons, including that they may simply be a mismatch, or they may be people who are more directly harmful. Building relationships requires an immense amount of discernment and assessing for safe relational patterns, and this is extremely important for all abuse survivors. And when the opportunity to be connected trumps awareness of harm or mismatch, this can be quite damaging to all parties involved. On the flip side, some survivors feel quite afraid of others and maintain a lot of distance to manage the fear of what other people may do to them or manage the fear of abandonment. We know from scientific research that isolation over time is correlated to physical and mental health issues. And we know from the simple act of being alive and paying attention that loneliness simply does not feel good. And then other survivors alternate between these two states, fearing being alone while also fearing being close. This is a very tricky dynamic because unlike survivors who are soothed by being connected or soothed by being alone, survivors who fear both can really struggle to feel comforted. It can be exhausting for them and very taxing on the nervous system. It can also be quite relationally difficult to manage for the people who love them and want to be close. Sometimes people in their lives report feeling pulled in and then pushed away in an ongoing cycle. Not all survivors struggle with the issues I've outlined. That feels important to name. And there can be quite a range of how intense these patterns are. For some, playing out in big ways in most areas of life, and for others, these patterns are isolated to more acute moments of distress. I want to turn now to highlighting some of the ways isolation and disconnection uniquely impact survivors of sexual violence who use entheogens and psychedelics in their healing. Being in community that embraces how you have chosen to heal is essential. You may have already been rejected by people in your life for coming out about sexual violence. The last thing you need is to be rejected for using plant medicines or psychedelics to heal. This can be very tricky. Due to the war on drugs, many people view the use of psychedelics as a form of substance misuse or abuse. For survivors who are in a form of sobriety, this can mean that sober community may be unsupportive. It may mean hiding your healing work or risking being rejected for it, which equates to further isolation. It might mean that people in your life who are not necessarily part of sober community, but view this work as a form of substance use will judge your choice to heal in this manner. If you are sensitive to rejection or shame due to your survivorship, this can be very triggering to be rejected around your choice to heal within an expanded state. Working with psychedelics has some potential health risks, and due to the war on drugs and the fact that using these substances is, in most cases, still criminalized, means that often the general public does not have accessible information about drug safety, medication interactions, safe dosing, drug testing, and more. What this means is that being involved in a loving community that also has ample knowledge about psychedelics is extremely helpful in using them safely. It also means that you will need to ask for help, which might feel unsettling if you have felt abandoned around your trauma in the past, struggle to trust others, or feel undeserving of help. In addition, the process of healing with psychedelics and entheogens can completely transform how you previously understood reality. For many, it brings on a crisis of faith, confusion concerning what life is about, disorienting questions about the nature of reality or the systems we live in, and deep grief about the state of the world. In terms of working on your trauma, you may learn things about how you feel that were previously more unconscious. Doing this type of work alone with a focus on sexual violence can be quite hard. If you work with a guide in the above ground or the below ground, and it is not an overnight experience, someone may need to pick you up from your medicine session. For some folks who are particularly isolated or in abusive relationships, it can be difficult to determine who should be your emergency contact or what safe person you can ask to support you with a ride home. Taking a cab is not a safe option if you are leaving a medicine session and still somewhat high, which is common as the effects of psychedelics can have a low level of intoxication or disorientation that continues for some hours. After one of these sessions, it is important to interact with people who can respect the work you have done and be attuned to the vulnerable state you are in. Suddenly seeing a partner or friend who you are in an abusive or harmful relationship with can be emotionally unsafe. Healing from sexual violence can be confusing, and in addition to all the things I just named, conversation with other people who are healing in similar ways can potentially help you learn and grow. Talking with others helps you understand these medicines and how to use them safely, as well as how to navigate expanded states. It helps you learn more about the nonlinear ways that people grow and can potentially offer some hope, validation, or direction in your own process. In addition, it might be useful to hear about how other people have navigated issues around family relationships, sexual relationships, ways other people manage their grief, etc., etc. For example, many non-survivors struggle to understand the difficulty of having a family that has denied abuse happened. Finding people who are also working on similar issues can be immensely supportive. Essentially, this is a community effort, and it is so integral to have the wisdom and care of others. It can also be a meaningful thing for you to offer your own wisdom and support and have it received and valued by fellow survivors. Connecting with other survivors can help to reduce shame and stigma. With all that said, it is also important to be careful about how you connect. We are all trying to be loved and love, and tricky dynamics can arise between traumatized folks. Be patient and kind with each other. Building relationships with other survivors that include things like sharing details about your trauma, or trying to save one another, or bonding over your pain can sometimes lead to feeling very overwhelmed or enacting some of the dynamics I talked about earlier, like a parent-child or savior-wounded victim dynamic. When in doubt, build relationships slowly. You can always share more about yourself later. So if you are not sure what feels right in terms of personal sharing or witnessing of someone else's experience, listen to the fact that a fully formed yes has not appeared yet and be patient with it. Additionally, as I spoke about in episode 3 on feelings, being witnessed is an important part of healing from sexual violence, and being in community provides a certain kind of witnessing. It may take you a long time to open up to being seen this way, but even someone else acknowledging how they see you working hard on yourself without knowing the content of what you are working on can be powerful. If you are isolated or not telling anyone about the work you are doing, it can feel painful not to be seen, and you are missing out on care. Another very sad and painful thing we need to talk about is the prevalence of guides and therapists sexually harming or harassing the people they work with, which I will talk about in more depth in a later episode. And I also spoke about at length in season 1, episode 16, entitled Dynamics of Sexual Harm in Psychedelic and Entheogenic Spaces. Survivors of childhood sexual abuse are more likely to be sexually abused by healing professionals than people who are not CSA survivors. You need community because that is part of how we vet guides and warn each other about practitioners who are out of integrity in order to prevent harm. And it is how we respond to harm once we know it has happened. This should not be something that you have to navigate, and yet it is. The criminalization of psychedelics and entheogens creates a complex environment for reporting sexual harm. And even if the work was not criminalized, what we know about current responses to sexual violence, whether it has been perpetrated in a healing relationship or not, is that around the world, our systems for dealing with harm are insufficient at responding to and preventing sexual violence. In the US, there is a movement to create licensing boards to regulate psychedelic practitioners, but we already have those for non-psychedelic therapists, and they are often ineffective. I am not saying it is a lost cause to create standards and ways of monitoring those standards at an institutional level, but rather, we know from experience in other modalities that that alone is not enough. Additionally, the large degree of unprocessed trauma and wounding many humans have often leaves bystanders unsure of what to do when harm happens, and sometimes in a state of denial. This is all quite awful to acknowledge, and we need to move forward with practical solutions to keeping each other as safe as possible and reducing the potential for harm. And this happens by being in loving, healthy community. And finally, as I stated earlier, isolation is simply bad for your health. Research indicates this, with one meta-analytic review finding that the long-term health impacts of isolation and loneliness are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day, increasing the risk of stroke, heart disease, dementia, type 2 diabetes, and early mortality. Research also indicates that sexual violence is bad for your physical and mental health. To mitigate the lifelong impact of sexual violence, it is important that you are not isolated and that you receive adequate attention toward healing. In terms of preparing for your journey and integrating it, build loving community. Build it at the pace that feels right to you. But if you are listening to this episode right now and not feeling totally solid about your community, or perhaps you don't have enough people to connect with around this type of healing, start making a plan for how you can build stronger relationships in this way. And remember that it takes years to build substantive community, so there is no need to pressure yourself to have it all figured out in a short time. Rather, consider what it might be like to make building a supportive community one of the more important parts of your life for the long haul. You deserve to have people around you who treat you with kindness and respect, and to have the opportunity to offer them the same. If you're looking for some places to find community around your healing process, a few ideas. Psychedelic societies are located all over the world and often put on events in person and online where you can find more people who may be on a similar path to you. You can go to globalpsychedelic.org to search for one near you. Integration groups are for people to come together around their use of psychedelics and entheogens and are generally spaces to share and ask questions. Some of them have a fee associated, and many are free of charge and run by volunteers. Often psychedelic societies will host them as well. You can search the internet to see what is available in your area. And while not psychedelic focused, Survivors of Incest Anonymous is a 12-step program with meetings online and in person. You can find out more at siawso.org. And if you are engaged in 12-step, but want to be in a psychedelic-friendly 12-step or recovery community, there are numerous groups doing psychedelic recovery meetings. The San Francisco Psychedelic Society has some that are online and therefore accessible anywhere in the world. You can learn more at psychedelicsocietysf.org. Okay, we will leave it there for today. Please, and I really mean it, take care of yourself after listening to this episode and as you move through the whole series. If you want to support the show, please rate it on whatever podcasting app you use and consider sharing this episode with people who may benefit. Thank you so much for supporting this work. I will be doing some free online Q&A sessions for people who have questions related to the series. I will announce the dates for that on my email list. I teach occasional classes, offer group and individual consultation to clinicians around the world, and provide psychotherapy to people located in California. If you are curious about my offerings, you can find more information and contact me via my website, lauramaynorthrup.com. And here's where I give out my social media handles, but I want to say a little something about social media. You only see what ends up being popular enough to come into your feed the days that you look at the app, an app that is controlled and censored by capitalist elites. If you want to ensure you hear about ways to work with me, learn from me, or get healing support, join my email list. I send very few emails, usually less than 5 per year. You can find it on my website, lauramaynorthrup.com, or there's a link in the show notes. And again, that is also where I will announce dates for any online Q&A sessions related to this season, so definitely sign up if you want to hear about those. And if you want to see memes and leave things up to social media fate, find me on Instagram at @LauraMayNorthrup. And don't forget, I have a new book out, Radical Healership. Check it out. Link in the show notes. Okay, until next time.